The narrative begins by recounting an ancient prophecy, however not centered on Arthur. A voice announces that one man will rise to destroy him, while another will be raised and destined to protect him. The legend of Camelot will remain as a constant backdrop. Even so, the series emphasizes that before kings and kingdoms existed, there was a child whose destiny would shape all of them irreversibly. To understand Arthur's future, the plot first dives into Merlin's past, revealing forgotten secrets and invisible forces. We are transported to 4th century Britannia, where a silent mystery drifts along the waters of a misty river. A sealed sack floats downstream until it becomes trapped in the net of a humble fisherman. Elphin, a man tormented by the conviction of carrying bad luck, is sent to check the nets in the hope of proving his worth and breaking the stigma that follows him. Instead of fish, he finds the enigmatic sack. Inside it is what appears to be a lifeless baby. The grim discovery seems to confirm his persistent misfortune until the impossible happens before his eyes. The baby moves and breathes again. Astonished but deeply moved, Elphin decides to raise the child as his son, naming him Taliesin. What seemed like chance reveals itself as a destiny shaped by greater forces. As Taliesin grows, signs indicate that he is not an ordinary child. He becomes a prodigious bard, endowed with an extraordinarily powerful and captivating voice. There is something supernatural within him, a presence that suggests a connection to ancient energies beyond the simple life he was given. His gifts point to a grand path, still not understood by father and son. The narrative advances 2 decades and introduces another thread of the story. In a vast coliseum, a young woman named Charis prepares for the imminent combat. She prays to the horned god, seeking strength before entering the bloody arena. However, the invoked deity conveys an unsettling aura, as if it desires destruction rather than sincere devotion. While Charis fights, a devastating earthquake shakes the arena, injuring her and plunging the city into absolute chaos. In parallel, Taliesin, now a young adult, feels drawn to an enigmatic circle of ancient stones. One of the rocks has fallen, revealing something hidden beneath it. Driven by visions of a mysterious figure, he removes the stone and perceives a supernatural presence linked to the horned god. The encounter is brief yet intense, leaving him deeply disturbed. Before he can understand its meaning, his friend Hafkin interrupts him with urgent news. Elphin needs him. Taliesin is summoned to help at a Roman fortress devastated by warriors painted in blue. The destruction is swift and brutal, suggesting that all of Britannia is about to enter a violent upheaval. Taliesin and Hafkin resort to magic to aid the wounded, but their efforts seem small in the face of the growing chaos. As the danger spreads, they seek refuge in the Summer Lands, ruled by King Avallac'h. There, hidden tensions simmer beneath diplomatic formalities. Avallac'h and Elphin struggle to trust each other, each suspicious of the other's intentions. In this unstable environment, Taliesin reunites with Charis. Between them arises an immediate connection, filled with attraction and shared traumas. Flashbacks reveal how Charis survived the arena disaster by confronting the apparent manifestation of the horned god. The bull that was meant to fight her collapsed unexpectedly. Her survival seems like divine intervention, although it is uncertain whether it represented genuine salvation or hidden manipulation. Despite the evident bond, Charis keeps her distance. She is divided between her Atlantean heritage and her new life in Britannia, uncertain about her own loyalties. Her sister Morgaine watches Taliesin with a strategic gaze. When a mare faces difficulties during childbirth, Taliesin uses magic to save both mother and foal. Morgaine witnesses the power and recognizes its potential. Ambitious and calculating, she begins to consider how such abilities can serve her own objectives, even if they require sacrifices. Rejected by Charis and unsettled by the visions and violence around him, Taliesin returns to the simple cabin presented earlier. Monks consider the place sacred, dedicated to the Christian god. Upon entering, an intense flash surrounds him, reminiscent of the energy experienced in the stone circle. Through memories, the fall of Atlantis is witnessed, consumed by volcanic fire and devastating chaos. Charis plays a crucial role by leading her people to safety, guiding them to the shores so that Avallac'h's brother can take them to Britannia. Even so, she does not see herself as a heroine. she only did what was necessary. One specific life was saved by her courage, Morgaine. As a child, Morgaine lay beside her mother's lifeless body while the world collapsed around her. If Charis had not returned to save Avalok's wife, she would never have found Morgaine and led her to safety. In that same moment, Charis also rescued her father's sword, an object of deep significance that suggests a legendary destiny and promises yet to be revealed. The episode then returns to the present timeline, in the monk's sacred cabin, where mystery and destiny continue to intertwine. Taliessin, struck by an intense explosion of sacred light, re-emerges deeply transformed. Elphin interprets the event as a prophetic sign, comparing his son to figures from the scriptures. Taliessin begins to embrace the Christian God, distancing himself from the ancient pagan traditions that once surrounded him. His new faith starts to define who he is and guides the decisions that approach, altering his spiritual and emotional path. When he later approaches Charis in the stables, he discovers with surprise that Morgan had deceived him by pretending to be her sister. It becomes evident that Morgan also deliberately injured the foal he had saved with magic. Upon realizing her manipulation and hidden ambition, Taliessin rejects any approach. The refusal fuels Morgan's growing resentment, planting the seeds of the vengeance that will shape her dark future. Determined to find Charis, Taliessin enters the forest and finds her ambushed by Irish invaders. Although she fights bravely, she would not survive without his intervention. In the silence after the battle, the bond between them becomes undeniable. Charis decides to choose her own destiny and asks her father for permission to marry Taliessin. Avalok promptly refuses. Instead of consenting, he keeps Charis confined in the castle, hoping to suffocate the matter. However, neither she nor Taliessin agrees to yield. They choose to remain together despite the opposition. Even so, Taliessin insists that they wait for marriage before consummating the union, faithful to his Christian convictions. Charis respects this decision. As proof of devotion, she gives him her father's sword, previously rejected and now offered as a symbol of commitment and trust. However, upon unsheathing the blade, Taliessin hears threatening whispers. The sword seems to carry a dark or ancestral energy, and he decides to leave it behind. The couple flees to the monk's cabin, where they are baptized and celebrate their marriage. The initial happiness comes at a high cost, as the union threatens to trigger deep political and familial tensions. Seeking a fresh start, they depart for the lands of Pendaran. The reception is cold at first, but Taliessin's talent transforms the situation. When he sings, his powerful voice envelops the crowd. The music unites those present, who join in chorus. Moved by his story and courage, the people allow them to stay. 9 months later, Charis is about to give birth. The Merlin bird they brought prepares to fly, a symbol of inevitable transformation. When the bird is released, Charis goes into labor. The birth is long, painful, and surrounded by tension. During this moment, Halfdan arrives, bringing news of reconciliation between Elphin and Avalok, and the promise of returning home. However, the celebration is interrupted. The baby is born without signs of life, plunging the couple into absolute despair. Amid the heavy rain, Taliessin lifts the child and begins to sing. As his voice echoes, the rain dissipates around them. In an unexpected miracle, the baby breathes again. As she holds him, Charis notices his golden eyes shining with incomprehensible meaning. They name him Merlin. The joy is short-lived. An arrow pierces Taliessin's chest, killing him before his family. Panic sets in as they search for the hidden attacker, until the truth is revealed. Morgan fired the projectile, fulfilling the first act of her calculated revenge. The narrative advances 75 years. Merlin, now an adult, walks alone through the forest. He seems hunted, restless, almost insane, but his steps reveal a defined purpose. He is not an ordinary fugitive. It is discovered that Merlin is kept imprisoned under the watch of Phine. Even in captivity, he unsettles those around him. He reveals truths about his captors, exposing fears and hidden intentions without receiving any prior information. His knowledge seems to go beyond the present, as if he could see beyond time. Conversations indicate something even more extraordinary. Phine is said to have brought Merlin back from the dead. Although he died decades earlier, he walks once again among the living. Many begin to believe that he belongs to the Fey folk, a supernatural and non-human creature. Faced with his inexplicable perception and impossible survival, such belief spreads quickly. Throughout the events, Merlin utters dark prophecies. He warns a local lord about approaching enemies and inevitable death. He also refutes rumors of dragons causing structural collapses, demonstrating that a spring hidden beneath the building is the true cause of the instability. Although some ridicule his statements, the lord gradually begins to trust Merlin. Before violence spreads throughout the fortress, Merlin demands the release of the imprisoned monks, including De5. His determination allows Merlin, Phiny, De5, and others to escape at the moment the battle erupts with devastating intensity. The events quickly confirm his warnings. An army advances relentlessly, and the king is killed, symbolically, by the hands of a young warrior. Amid the growing chaos, another familiar name resurfaces, Uther. Now allied with the invading forces, he begins a relentless pursuit. Even so, Merlin displays an unsettling calm, as if every step had already been predicted with calculated precision. In this scenario, Aurelio leads the troops. Merlin is brought into his presence. Unlike the others, Aurelio recognizes Merlin's true identity, granting him temporary protection against Uther's suspicions and hostilities. However, those familiar with Arthurian legends know that alliances like this are rarely lasting or stable. The narrative then introduces a decisive artifact, a legendary sword in Aurelio's possession. Merlin reacts with unusual intensity upon touching it, being overtaken by a vision of future kings gathered in a circle, while the blade, in the end, appears rusted and forgotten by time. Although Aurelio does not know the exact origin of the weapon, Merlin identifies it as the Sword of Britannia, a symbol of the High King and the foundation of the Summer Kingdom. This revelation establishes the foundations of Arthur's destiny, still distant but inevitable on the horizon. The conflict continues as Merlin and his companions flee once again into the forest, pursued by forces whose identity remains partially obscure. The chase intensifies the urgency, although Merlin's calm indicates that events are following the course he had anticipated. He returns to the sacred cabin presented earlier, the same place where his story intertwined with divine power and irrevocable destiny. There, waiting as if time had not touched her, he finds Charis. She appears preserved by the passing decades. Mother and son reunite after a lifetime of painful and silent separation. Meanwhile, Prince Passant decides to avenge his father's death. He seeks out Hengist and reminds him of the blood oath made to Vortigern, a pact that bound them until death. However, Hengist reveals that his loyalty is circumstantial. In a brutal and calculated act, he murders Passant, breaking the obligation and freeing himself to pursue his own ambitions. With the obstacle removed, he directs his attention to eliminating Constance's sons and expanding his political and military domain. At the same time, Merlin experiences an unexpected reunion with his grandfather, the King of Akach. Avallac'h receives Aurelio and Uther in his court with surprising openness, despite the tension surrounding them. He even shows a certain respect for Uther's direct frankness. During a strategic banquet, a decisive plan is drawn. Merlin will travel alongside Phiny and Uther to consolidate alliances in support of Aurelio's claim. While Aurelio remains, Charis offers Merlin the legendary sword, an artifact deeply connected to his past. However, upon wielding it, Merlin is overcome by a disturbing vision and realizes that he cannot use it again. He admits that, in the years in which he was believed dead, he was not with God in the way expected. Instead, Morgaine's presence haunted him during that dark period, suggesting unsettling and complex spiritual entanglements. While Merlin, Phiny, and Uther seek allies, tensions intensify dangerously. Merlin tries to instigate distrust in Uther by showing him a painting intended to portray Merlin as something not entirely human, perhaps even fey. Phiny intercepts the imminent confrontation, and a fight breaks out. Phiny subdues Uther with surprising ease, while Merlin demonstrates supernatural authority by immobilizing him with a simple controlled gesture. He ensures that Mirig's father continues to rule over the lands tied to Merlin's heritage, demanding firm loyalty in the face of the wars to come. The alliance is consolidated under calculated tension. The journey continues to Morkant of the Belg. Uther conceals his identity during the journey, and conflicts arise before Merlin gains formal audience. Morkant initially refuses any concession of power, but Merlin's prophetic warnings and veiled threats convince him to reconsider. Thus, another ruler inclines himself to Aurelio's cause, strengthening the network of alliances that will shape Britannia's future. Back at Avalok's fortress, an additional revelation emerges, laden with omens. Charis confesses that no child has been born among her people for many years, not since Merlin's birth, a fact underscored by the meaningful glance directed at Charis. The Atlantean lineage is in rapid decline, and Avalok fears the complete extinction of his ancestral culture and sacred customs. For this reason, he hesitates to commit his troops when Aurelio comes under attack in his own lands. Charis, however, refuses to remain passive in the face of the imminent conflict. Although she claims that she rides accompanied by guards only for strategic safety, she intervenes decisively when Aurelio faces Hengist in direct combat. At the moment when Aurelio seems destined for defeat, Charis and her warriors charge against the enemy, altering the outcome of the battle with calculated bravery. Far from provoking Avalok's anger, such an action earns his respectful approval. He recognizes Aurelio's sense of honor and the courage demonstrated in defense of his threatened people. The narrative then returns to Morgane, revealing the unsettling existence she has built over the years. Now a mother, she raises her children under the influence of her dark ambition. One of them displays disturbing cruelty by crushing a crab with calculated coldness. The firstborn, more reflective and strategic, proposes supporting Aurelio politically. Morgane reminds him of the secret pact made with the Saxons, a dangerous alliance that could condemn them as traitors if it were revealed. The family finds itself divided between strategic loyalty and brutal survival instinct. In a particularly dark scene, Morgan conducts a ritual in a shadowy chamber where a demonic presence seems to emerge from the dense darkness. When her son witnesses part of the ceremony, she downplays his concerns and hands him an enigmatic box, sealing the moment with an unsettlingly intimate and calculated gesture. Whatever her ultimate plan may be, it goes beyond mere personal revenge and points toward broader ambitions. In retrospect, Halfgone tries to convince Druids to accept the teachings of Jesus and the Great Light, but his weakened credibility deeply frustrates the young Merlin. In a bold act to draw attention and provoke reflection, Merlin occupies a sacred seat reserved for the chosen, a gesture considered blasphemous. Instead of retreating in the face of the reaction, he reveals impressive resilience and unwavering conviction. Meanwhile, Aurelio's coexistence with Avalok and Charis shapes in him a more compassionate and measured vision of political leadership. Tensions rise when several British kings express open distrust toward the Pendragon brothers and their intentions. Ancient rivalries and historical resentments make delicate negotiations difficult, especially because some consider their father more harmful than the Saxons themselves. Gorlas, in particular, prefers Vortigern's strategy to contain invaders, turning Aurelio's past actions into a significant obstacle. Turdrig tries to advise the brothers in Merlin's absence, but Uther reacts with growing impatience to the guidance he receives. Convinced that everyone conspires against Aurelio, his inflexible stance compromises important diplomatic efforts. The conflict reaches its climax when Mork appoints Gorlas to the position of Dux Britannia, sparking immediate outrage in Uther. Gorlas then openly challenges Aurelio, claiming that he has not yet proven himself worthy of the throne. The duel that follows becomes an emblematic moment of the narrative. The choreography is intense, strategic, and precise, with Uther offering tactical advice at the edge of the improvised arena. Although Aurelio ultimately triumphs, he chooses to show mercy instead of executing the defeated opponent. Gorlas, moved by the unexpected clemency, kneels in formal respect. However, the price of victory is high, as Aurelio suffers severe and debilitating injuries. Parallel to the growing political drama, Merlin's journey reveals an increasing understanding that not even his powers can fully rewrite destiny. His troubled past with Custennin resurfaces, especially regarding the tragic death of Ganida. Custanin's bitterness proves understandable, as he believes Merlin failed at the decisive moment. Even so, by imprisoning Merlin and Peleus, he seems driven more by intense pain than by a balanced sense of justice. The cruel attempt to drown Peleus to force a magical reaction exposes desperation and deep suffering. Merlin's magic remains restrained and disciplined. When he finally releases it, the power displayed is unsettling, explaining why he fears using it recklessly in open war. Despite the growing doubts around him, Merlin insists that Aurelio is destined for the throne, although subtle signs suggest a more complex fate than he imagines. Romantic elements also intertwine with the narrative. The visions involving Ginetta gain new emotional meaning, indicating a bond that still influences important decisions. The introduction of Ugera adds an additional layer of future intrigue and potential tension. The story then returns to Merlin's youth, exploring his first love and the painful realization that destiny often demands inevitable losses and profound transformations. The young Merlin is portrayed with remarkable emotional sensitivity. After years among the hill people, he believes he has a purpose there, not seeing himself as a prisoner. Under Gersvina's guidance, he refines his healing abilities and gains a better understanding of the reach and limits of his extraordinary gifts. However, not everyone can be saved, reinforcing the recurring theme that destiny cannot always be overcome. The tone softens when Merlin meets Ginetta, and the narrative blossoms into an intense and vibrant youthful romance. Their first encounter is light and memorable. Ginetta finds him during a boar hunt and responds to his sharp humor with fearless confidence. Instead of being intimidated, she openly flirts and asks for help carrying the slain animal. She shows immediate interest in Merlin's enigmatic past and encourages him to remain by her side and that of her father, Custanin. Although he avoided royal environments, Merlin cleverly uses his lineage to gain Custanin's approval. The king, devoted to his daughter, does not require much persuasion. In a short time, Merlin is welcomed into the household, and the romance matures with growing intensity and promises of a shared future. After the marriage, Merlin and Ginetta choose autonomy, determined to build a home of their own without relying entirely on Custanin's guardianship and political influence. The narrative then returns to Miadunum, where Merlin had previously lived under the protection of King Penderan in earlier times. The serenity is abruptly shattered when barbarians launch an attack against Miadunum. The assault proves fierce and chaotic, with flaming arrows streaking across the sky and residents exposed to immediate and terrifying danger. For the first time, Merlin appears fully unleashed amid the bloody conflict. Covered in blood and driven by intense determination, he proves to be far more than a mere healer or advisor. His actions save Penderan and preserve the fortress, earning widespread admiration among seasoned warriors. In a decisive and symbolic moment, Penderan honors him before all, offering him the title of son and rightful successor. The soldiers present raise their hands in a sign of loyalty, elevating Merlin to the position of supreme commander in future battles. Even so, the narrative continually reminds that such joy is not permanent. Gurnifon's final warning, stating that Merlin's path is set by God and marked by inevitable pain, casts a persistent shadow over his destiny. The prophecy is fulfilled in devastating fashion when tragedy strikes Ginetta and the child she carried in her womb. The loss tears Merlin apart emotionally and deeply shakes his rooted faith. What emerges afterward is a darker version of Merlin, consumed by suffering and uncontrollable fury, abandoning moderation and hunting those responsible with relentless and cold intensity. His violence, driven by pain, seems almost untamable, revealing how deeply the loss has fractured him internally. In a disturbing moment, he nearly turns his blade against Custanin, revealing how thin the boundary has become between devastating grief and irreversible destruction. Curiously, Custanin reacts differently from the bitterness he will later display. Instead of immediately accusing, he initially shows concern for Merlin's condition, indicating that the deterioration between them occurs gradually rather than instantly. Merlin is profoundly transformed, a man who knew love, authority, and family only to lose everything in a cruel and definitive way. The narrative then examines Merlin's fate after Ginetta's death. Following the violent events that came after the loss, he sinks into a dark and isolated spiritual state. Consumed by guilt over the men he killed in his fury, he believes he deserves to remain in darkness and voluntary exile. However, an enigmatic traveler challenges this belief, stating that his true path lies in a different direction and is not yet complete. Taliesin appears at this crucial moment, bringing about an intense meeting between father and son separated by suffering. Taliesin understands Merlin's pain more deeply than anyone else and reminds him that his existence holds a greater purpose, warning him not to allow despair to consume his essence. Meanwhile, the situation in Britannia worsens drastically. The Pendragon forces face an overwhelming disadvantage against the invading Saxons. Their contingent numbers around 2,500 men, while the Saxon army exceeds 15,000 well-armed warriors. Tension spreads throughout the camp, and disagreements among leaders threaten to further weaken the cohesion necessary for collective survival. Many begin to see Merlin as the last real hope of victory. When he returns bringing reinforcements from the distant north, a fragile possibility of resistance is reborn among the weary soldiers. Uther, often at odds with Merlin in the past, reluctantly admits that they depend on his strategic leadership. Despite his wounded pride, fear for Aurelio's life leads him to accept this reality. He believes that under Merlin's command, both Britannia and Aurelio will be able to survive the imminent and decisive confrontation. The responsibility weighs heavily on Merlin, almost crushing his determination. He recalls the last time he wielded the sword that symbolizes power and command, and that memory deeply unsettles him. In search of renewed inner strength, he honors his father's legacy as the first bard of his ancestral lineage. He plucks the harp and sings a chant about the Summer Kingdom, a vision of a harmonious land where peoples protect one another and live in lasting peace. Although such an ideal seems distant amid brutal war, it represents hope passed down through generations. Merlin proclaims himself the last true bard and prepares to honor Aurelio according to ancient sacred traditions. Before the confrontation, Uther discreetly hands him a sword for possible urgent need. As the armies line up for battle, Aurelio inspires the men with a vigorous speech, while Uther incites them with warrior fervor. When the clash begins, chaos spreads with devastating speed. At first, the ranks waver, but Uther stabilizes the troops by raising his voice in a martial chant, restoring enough order for them to advance. During the turmoil, Morgan approaches Merlin disguised under the appearance of Ganida and attempts an alternative and manipulative strategy. She leads Aurelio into a dangerous situation by arranging a secret meeting with enemy Saxons. Her words quickly reveal an unsettling dissonance. She questions Merlin's faith and suggests that the Great Light will not protect him if he does not protect himself first. Merlin perceives the hidden deceit. Morgan exposes deep resentment, stating that she has always lived in Charis's shadow without true recognition. Convinced that she can influence him, she tries to seduce him and persuade him to choose her as an ally and lover. For a brief moment, Merlin wavers under her subtle and dangerous influence, but Taliesin intervenes once again with spiritual firmness. His presence breaks Morgan's control and restores Merlin's inner strength to face the imminent destiny. Taliesin performs a symbolic purification on Merlin, encouraging him to abandon the inner shadow and fully embrace the destiny that was assigned to him since birth. On the devastated battlefield, Aurelio engages in a deadly duel against the Saxon leader Hengist in a decisive confrontation. For tense moments, it seems that Morgan's scheme will achieve its dark success, but events follow an unexpected and surprising direction. Aurelio returns alive to the camp, raising Hengist's head as undeniable proof of absolute and unquestionable triumph. With the Saxons defeated and scattered, the surviving chiefs gather in a solemn assembly, and Aurelio is finally proclaimed the rightful High King of Britannia before all. The moment gains symbolic weight when Uther presents the ceremonial sword and Merlin publicly declares Aurelio's kingship before the assembled armies. However, the celebration proves to be fleeting and fragile in the face of the invisible forces of destiny. Merlin had already contemplated visions of Britannia's future in which the unity of the kingdom dissolves as ambitious lords enter into fierce disputes for power. Even after the formal coronation, signs of rivalry persist among influential nobles. As suspicions resurface and alliances waver, Merlin quietly withdraws from the turbulent celebration. Driven by a deeper and inevitable inner calling, he wields the sacred sword and drives it into a massive stone, establishing an enigmatic symbol whose full meaning still remains hidden, foreshadowing great events that will transform Britannia's destiny and prepare the path for the future rise of Arthur.